What if wanting to write a book was a medical condition? What if owning property made you legally invisible? What if thinking too hard could permanently damage your ovaries? Dive into 6 incredible attempts to cure female independence, practices that sound like something out of a dark fantasy, but were shockingly real. Number 6. The Wandering Womb, Ancient Foundations of Female Madness. Imagine living in a world where your very anatomy was seen as a restless, unpredictable entity, constantly seeking to disrupt your peace and sanity. This wasn't a plot from a speculative fiction novel. It was a widely accepted medical belief for thousands of years, with roots stretching back to ancient civilizations. For centuries, the uterus, or womb, was thought to be a free-moving organ, capable of roaming throughout a woman's body, causing a myriad of symptoms from anxiety and shortness of breath to paralysis and even sudden death. This ancient theory, which birthed the term hysteria, laid a foundational blueprint for how female independence, or any deviation from prescribed female roles, could be pathologized and subsequently cured. The concept of the wandering womb first prominently emerged in ancient Egypt, documented in papyri dating back as far as 1900 BC. These early texts describe symptoms like choking, fainting, and pain, attributing them to a uterus that had moved out of place, perhaps ascending to the liver or even the head. Proposed remedies were often aromatic, foul-smelling substances applied to the mouth or nose to repel the errant womb, and pleasant scents applied to the vagina to entice it back down to its proper position. The idea was to coax or coerce this independent organ back to its assigned space, much like trying to force an unruly child back to its room. When Greek physicians later adopted and expanded upon these ideas, the concept of hysteria truly solidified. Hippocrates, often called the father of medicine, detailed these symptoms in his writings, describing a woman's body as inherently prone to illness if her womb was not satisfied or if she remained unmarried and childless. For Hippocrates and his followers, a woman's health, and indeed her sanity, was intrinsically tied to her reproductive function. If the womb was dry or stagnant, or if a woman did not engage in sexual activity or bear children, the womb would supposedly become restless, producing harmful vapors that would then spread throughout the body, suffocating other organs and causing a range of physical and mental disturbances. Plato, the renowned philosopher, also contributed to this theory, describing the uterus as a living creature that gets restless and goes about to all parts of the body, causing extreme perplexity and gasping, and brings on all manner of diseases. For him, marriage and childbearing were not just societal expectations, but essential medical prescriptions for women to maintain their physical and mental equilibrium. If a woman felt a sense of ambition or expressed desires beyond the domestic sphere, these might be interpreted as symptoms of her wayward womb, seeking to escape its intended purpose. The remedies proposed by these ancient thinkers were often astonishingly simplistic, yet deeply influential for millennia. Marriage was frequently cited as the ultimate cure, as sexual intercourse and pregnancy were believed to anchor the uterus in its proper place and satiate its supposed needs. Fumigations, both pleasant and unpleasant, continued to be recommended. Strong-smelling substances like garlic or rotten meat might be placed near the woman's nose to drive the womb downwards, while sweet-smelling oils or perfumes were applied near the vagina to lure it back into position. In some instances, vigorous exercises or even certain diets were prescribed, all with the goal of physically or chemically persuading this wayward organ to settle down. The enduring legacy of the wandering womb theory is profound. It established a powerful narrative that linked female anatomy directly to irrationality and a predisposition to illness. It suggested that women were inherently less stable than men, their minds and bodies perpetually at the mercy of an independent internal organ. This ancient medical belief provided a scientific-sounding justification for societal control over women's lives, from their marital status to their reproductive choices. If a woman expressed independent thoughts, desired a life outside of traditional roles, or exhibited any form of intellectual or emotional autonomy, these could be framed as symptoms of her inherent biological instability rather than as expressions of individual will. For centuries, this ancient idea, refined and reinterpreted, continued to shape medical practices and social norms. It served as a bedrock for later diagnoses of hysteria that would plague women for thousands of years, long after the concept of a literally wandering organ had been discarded by more advanced medical understanding. The seed had been planted. Female independence was not just undesirable. It was a potential medical pathology that needed to be understood, diagnosed, and ultimately cured. It set the stage for countless future attempts to regulate women's bodies and minds, all under the guise of restoring health and order. The very idea that a woman's reproductive system dictated her personality and potential was a powerful, pervasive, and incredibly convenient tool for controlling and limiting women's lives, ensuring that any deviation from the prescribed path could be labeled as a symptom of an internal malfunction rather than a legitimate desire for autonomy. Number 5. Legal disappearance. The chains of coverture. Imagine a world where, the moment you say, "I do," your legal identity effectively vanishes. You can no longer own property in your own name, sign contracts, keep your wages, or even represent yourself in court. This was not a dystopian novel. It was the reality for married women under the legal doctrine of coverture, a foundational principle of common law that dominated Western legal systems for centuries, particularly in England and its colonies, including early America. Coverture acted as an invisible, yet incredibly powerful chain binding women's independence and absorbing their legal existence into that of their husbands. Derived from the French word couvre, meaning to cover. Coverture meant that upon marriage, a woman became a theme covert, a covered woman. Her legal identity was subsumed by her husband's. In the eyes of the law, the husband and wife became one person, and that one person was the husband. The renowned English jurist William Blackstone, whose Commentaries on the Laws of England 1765–1769 heavily influenced Anglo-American law, famous Spalmeen Muchray, and Ackley Church de Froberd. This was not just a metaphorical statement. It had profound, tangible consequences for every aspect of a married woman's life. Let's consider what this truly meant for a woman in her daily existence. If a woman entered marriage owning land, that land immediately became her husband's to manage, to collect rents from, and even to sell, often without her consent. If she earned wages from her work, those wages legally belonged to her husband. She could not sign a contract, borrow money, or incur debt independently. If she had a small business before marriage, it essentially became her husband's. Even her personal belongings, from her clothing to her jewelry, were technically his property. The implications for legal standing were equally severe. A married woman could not sue or be sued in court in her own name. Her husband had to represent her. If she committed a crime, her husband might be held responsible for her actions. If her husband committed an offense, she might face legal consequences. This legal intertwining meant that a woman's voice in the public sphere, her economic agency, and her ability to protect her own interests were systematically dismantled upon marriage. Her legal cure for independence was in essence to cease to be an independent legal person. For example, imagine a woman named Eleanor in the 18th century, who inherited a substantial sum of money from her wealthy aunt. If she married Thomas, that money instantly became Thomas's property. He could use it, invest it, or squander it as he pleased, and Eleanor would have no legal recourse to control it. If she wanted to purchase a new dress, she would need to ask her husband for the funds, as any money she had was legally his. If she worked as a seamstress and earned money, Those earnings were not hers to keep. They belonged to her husband. This system meant that even if a woman was economically productive, her productivity legally benefited her husband, not herself, diminishing her incentive for independent economic action and reinforcing her economic dependence. The rationale behind coverture was rooted in patriarchal social structures and religious interpretations. It was argued that the husband, as the head of the household, was responsible for the family's well-being and thus needed absolute control over its resources. The law reflected the belief that women were inherently weaker, more emotional, and less capable of making rational decisions, thus requiring the guidance and protection of their husbands. This paternalistic view framed the erosion of a woman's legal identity, not as a loss but as a necessary and even beneficial protection, a safeguard that ensured her stability and the smooth functioning of society. While coverture was the dominant legal framework, there were some limited exceptions and gradual shifts over time. Equity courts, for example, sometimes allowed for specific trusts or prenuptial agreements to protect a woman's property from her husband, especially among the wealthy. However, these were complex and not widely accessible. By the mid-19th century, with the rise of the women's rights movement, the inequities of coverture became a significant target for reform. The Married Women's Property Acts, first appearing in the United States and then in the United Kingdom, gradually chipped away at the doctrine granting married women the right to own property, control their earnings, and engage in legal transactions independently. Yet, the complete dismantling of coverture was a slow process, with remnants of its influence persisting into the 20th century in various legal contexts. The enduring legacy of coverture was its profound impact on the economic and social status of women. It created a legal framework that actively discouraged female independence by making it legally impossible for married women to exercise autonomy over their own resources and identities. It reinforced the idea that a woman's primary role was within the domestic sphere, dependent on her husband, and that her legal standing was merely an extension of his. This legal cure for independence ensured that any aspirations for self-governance or economic autonomy would be met with an impenetrable legal wall, compelling women into a state of legal dependency under the guise of unity and protection. The very act of marriage, a union meant to bring two people together, legally erased one of them, ensuring that the path to independence was firmly blocked for centuries. Number 4. Brains and bodies. The dangerous pursuit of education. Imagine being told that pursuing knowledge, delving into challenging academic subjects, or even simply reading too much, could physically harm you. Not just your eyes, but your vital organs, your reproductive system, and even your sanity. This was the widely propagated belief in the 19th century, particularly in America and Britain, concerning women and higher education. Pursuit of intellectual development by women was often framed as a profound medical threat, capable of disrupting their delicate female physiology and rendering them unfit for their natural role in society. The audacious idea that education could literally sicken women became a powerful tool to discourage female independence, particularly intellectual autonomy. One of the most influential and widely debated proponents of this theory was Dr. Edward H. Clarke, a Harvard Medical School professor, whose 1873 book Sex and Education, or A Fair Chance for the Girls, became a sensation. Dr. Clarke argued that women's bodies were fundamentally different from men's, operating on a delicate balance of nervous energy. He proposed that this energy was finite and critically needed to be conserved for the primary function of female existence: reproduction. According to Clarke, the intense mental exertion required for higher education, particularly during a woman's formative years of puberty and adolescence, would dangerously divert this vital energy away from her reproductive organs. Consequences, as described by Dr. Clarke and his followers, were dire. He warned that intellectual activity would lead to an underdeveloped uterus, diminished ovaries, and even sterility. Women who pursued higher education risked becoming monstrous brains in a comparatively undeveloped or imperfectly developed body. They would suffer from chronic fatigue, nervous exhaustion, neurasthenia, headaches, digestive problems, and a host of other debilitating ailments. Their minds would become overstimulated, leading to irritability, anxiety, and even outright madness. In short, a well-educated woman was envisioned as a sickly, infertile, and perpetually nervous wreck, incapable of bearing healthy children or fulfilling her domestic duties. Consider a young woman, perhaps named Clara, in the late 1800s, who showed a keen intellect and a passion for mathematics. Her parents might have been advised by their family physician that sending her to a university would be a grave mistake. The doctor might have explained that Clara's womanly functions would suffer. Her brain, by processing complex equations, would draw too much blood and nervous force away from her developing ovaries and uterus, causing them to atrophy. This would not only make her sterile but also lead to severe nervous derangements and make her generally frail and sickly, a burden to her family. The physician might have suggested that Clara focus on domestic arts, light reading, and plenty of rest, rather than the strenuous intellectual challenges of college. The arguments against female education extended beyond physical health. Critics also claimed that intellectual women would become unfeminine, unattractive, and undesirable as wives and mothers. Their minds would become too masculine, their bodies too weak, and their focus too diverted from the home. Education, it was feared, would unsex women, making them too independent and less inclined to accept their subordinate roles in society. The very idea of women engaging in critical thinking, scientific inquiry, or deep philosophical debate was seen as a threat to the established social order and to what was considered the natural balance between the sexes. Dr. Clarke's theories were not universally accepted, and many women and progressive thinkers fiercely challenged them. M. Carey Thomas, the second president of Bryn Mawr College, famously countered these arguments by demonstrating the academic rigor and physical health of her female students. She noted that Bryn Mawr actively encouraged physical activity and monitored student health, and her students proved perfectly capable of intellectual achievement without suffering from the predicted physical ailments. Other women's colleges, like Vassar, Wellesley, and Smith, also pushed back against these notions, demonstrating that female students could excel academically while maintaining good health. Despite these challenges, the medical establishment's warnings about the dangers of female education had a profound, chilling effect for decades. They provided a scientific justification for restricting women's access to higher learning, limiting their career opportunities, and confining them to the domestic sphere. The message was clear. Intellectual independence for women came at a severe, even crippling, biological cost. This cure for female independence was subtle but pervasive, acting as a powerful deterrent to women pursuing intellectual pursuits and professional aspirations, ensuring that their energies remained focused on hearth and home, rather than lecture halls or laboratories. It reinforced the idea that a woman's body was a delicate, volatile instrument, easily disrupted by the unnatural act of independent thought and ambition, effectively keeping them in a state of carefully managed physical and mental fragility. Number 3. The domestic goddess, confining women to the proper sphere. Imagine a society where a woman's worth was meticulously defined by her ability to create a haven of moral purity and comfort within the walls of her home, where her highest aspiration was to be an angel in the house, and where stepping outside this prescribed role was seen as a moral failing and a threat to social order. This wasn't just a cultural preference. It was a powerful, pervasive societal construct known as the cult of domesticity, or the cult of true womanhood, which flourished in the 19th century, particularly in America and Britain. This widespread belief system acted as a powerful, non-physical cure for female independence, channeling women's energies and identities exclusively into the domestic sphere, effectively extinguishing aspirations beyond it. The cult of domesticity defined the ideal woman through 4 cardinal virtues: piety, purity, submissiveness, and domesticity. Piety meant that women were seen as naturally more religious and moral than men, responsible for instilling spiritual values in their children and maintaining the family's moral compass. Purity was paramount, emphasizing virginity before marriage and absolute fidelity within it. Any deviation was a severe moral transgression that could ruin a woman's reputation and prospects. Submissiveness meant that a woman was expected to defer to her husband's authority, accepting her subordinate role in the family structure. Her will was to be harmonized with his. Domesticity meant that a woman's natural domain was the home. Her skills were to be focused on homemaking, child-rearing, and creating a comfortable, nurturing environment for her family. This ideal was tirelessly promoted through popular literature, women's magazines, advice manuals, sermons, and public discourse. Books like Catherine Beecher's A Treatise on Domestic Economy, 1841, provided detailed instructions on how to manage a household efficiently, raise children properly, and cultivate a serene home environment. These texts often framed domestic duties not as mundane chores but as a sacred mission, a noble calling for women to shape the moral fiber of the nation through the purity of their homes. Consider a young woman, perhaps named Eliza, living in a bustling 19th century city. She might have read countless stories and articles depicting the joys of a well-ordered home, the serene happiness of a devoted wife and mother. She would have been told that her innate sensibilities made her uniquely suited for domestic life, while the harsh realities of the public sphere, business, politics, industry, were too crude and morally corrupting for her delicate nature. If Eliza expressed an interest in politics or wished to open a shop, she would likely be met with shock and disapproval. Her family and community might gently or not so gently remind her that her true influence lay in shaping the minds of her children and providing a peaceful refuge for her husband, not in venturing into the noisy competitive world outside. The separation of spheres was a key concept. Men belonged to the public sphere of work, commerce, and politics, while women belonged to the private sphere of the home. This division was presented as natural, divinely ordained, and essential for social stability. The home was portrayed as a sanctuary from the brutalities of the industrializing world, and the woman as its gentle guardian was responsible for maintaining its purity and order. This seemingly romantic ideal, however, had a profound restrictive power. It actively discouraged women from seeking education beyond what was necessary for domestic management, from pursuing careers, from engaging in political activism, or from expressing any ambition that lay outside the confines of the home. The cure for female independence here was subtle but powerful. It was a cultural and ideological conditioning that framed independence as unnatural, unfeminine, and even morally dangerous. If a woman felt a pull toward self-sufficiency, a desire for a life beyond the domestic, she was made to feel that she was failing her family, her gender, and even her God. The social pressure to conform to the angel in the house ideal was immense, enforced by community expectations, religious teachings, and the constant stream of popular media. Women who did not conform were often seen as odd, selfish, or even depraved. This ideal also had economic implications. By confining women to the unpaid labor of the home, it reinforced their economic dependence on men. While middle and upper-class women were expected to embody this ideal fully, working-class women often had no choice but to work outside the home. However, even for them, the ideal of domesticity remained a powerful aspiration, shaping their self-perception and often leading to feelings of inadequacy if they could not achieve it. Cult of domesticity eventually faced challenges from various women's rights movements and from changing economic realities that pulled more women into the workforce. However, its influence lingered for many decades, shaping expectations about gender roles well into the 20th century. It left a lasting legacy of associating femininity with domesticity and emotionality, while independence and ambition were often seen as masculine traits. The beautiful, serene image of the angel in the house was, in many ways, a gilded cage, designed to keep women contentedly within their proper sphere, ensuring that their independence, their aspirations, and their potential remained carefully contained, ultimately curing any urge to venture beyond the meticulously constructed walls of their domestic world. Number 2. The cure for unruliness: surgical interventions. Imagine a time when the mere expression of strong emotions, a persistent headache, or even the natural act of masturbation could lead to a doctor recommending the surgical removal of healthy reproductive organs. This horrifying reality was a significant feature of 19th and early 20th century medicine, particularly targeting women diagnosed with hysteria or other nervous disorders. Procedures like clitoridectomy, removal of the clitoris, and oophorectomy, removal of the ovaries, were shockingly common, performed not to cure a physical disease but to cure female independence, unruliness, and any behavior deemed abnormal or inconvenient by male medical authorities. The theoretical underpinnings for these extreme surgeries were rooted in the pervasive belief that women's reproductive organs were the source of their emotional instability and unruly behavior. Building on the ancient wandering womb theories and later medical ideas, many physicians of the era believed that the uterus and ovaries controlled a woman's entire being, her moods, her sanity, her morality, and her capacity for social conformity. If a woman exhibited symptoms of anxiety, depression, irritability, nymphomania, a derogatory term for high female sexual desire, epilepsy, or even simply expressed independent thoughts, or challenged authority, these behaviors could be attributed to a diseased or overactive reproductive system. The cure was to remove the presumed source of the problem: oophorectomy. The surgical removal of the ovaries became particularly popular, sometimes referred to as female castration. It was performed for an incredibly wide range of conditions that today we would recognize as mental health issues, neurological disorders, or simply normal aspects of female experience. Doctors would justify these procedures by claiming that the ovaries were unstable, diseased, or the cause of symptoms ranging from mood swings and insomnia to excessive ambition and a desire for social reform. For example, a woman diagnosed with neurasthenia, a vague diagnosis of nervous exhaustion often given to educated or ambitious women, might be told that her ovaries were causing her distress, and their removal would restore her to a state of calm and docility. Consider the case of a fictional woman, Mrs. Adams, in the late 1800s. She might have been a spirited woman who enjoyed robust debates, perhaps even expressing opinions on politics, which was considered highly unusual for a woman of her social standing. Her husband, perhaps, finding her too assertive or too nervous, might have consulted their family doctor. The doctor, subscribing to the prevailing medical wisdom, might have observed her flushing, her restlessness, and her strong opinions, and concluded that her ovaries were overactive and causing her hysteria. The recommended solution? A bilateral oophorectomy, promising to calm her nerves, reduce her unfeminine assertiveness, and make her a more compliant wife. The surgery, performed without anesthesia or with very primitive forms, would have been brutal, carrying immense risks of infection and death, and leaving Mrs. Adams infertile and often in a state of early menopause, with all its debilitating symptoms. The explicit goal was to reduce her unruliness and make her more feminine meaning, more docile and submissive. Clitoridectomy, the removal of the clitoris, was another disturbing practice, though less widespread than oophorectomy in Europe and America. It was primarily performed to cure female masturbation, which was seen as a moral depravity and a cause of various illnesses, including hysteria, epilepsy, and even blindness. Physicians believed that removing the clitoris would eliminate the source of sexual pleasure, thereby stopping masturbation and, in turn, curing the associated illnesses. While its primary target was female sexual autonomy, its broader aim was to control female bodies and behaviors that deviated from strict Victorian moral codes. These surgeries were not fringe practices. They were championed by respected medical figures of the time. Dr. Robert Batty, an American surgeon, became famous for his oophorectomies, performing them for various nervous disorders and claiming high success rates in curing women of their supposed ailments. British surgeon Isaac Baker Brown also advocated for clitoridectomy as a cure for epilepsy and other conditions linked to excessive female sexual activity. While their methods and theories were eventually debunked by later medical advancements and a growing understanding of psychology, they left behind a trail of devastated women whose lives were irrevocably altered. The medical establishment's use of these invasive surgeries served as a powerful form of social control. By pathologizing independent thought, ambition, sexual agency, or even just strong emotions in women, and then offering a surgical cure, the medical community reinforced patriarchal norms. It implied that any deviation from the prescribed docile, domestic, and non-sexual female ideal was a medical problem, not a legitimate expression of individuality. The message was clear. If a woman's mind or body resisted conformity, it could be physically altered to ensure her submission. These cures for female independence were not just physically violent. They were also deeply symbolic, representing a profound attempt to literally cut away any part of a woman that might lead her away from the prescribed path of quiet obedience and domesticity. The scars these surgeries left were not only physical but emotional, a stark reminder of a time when the very essence of womanhood could be surgically altered to ensure conformity. Number 1. The rest cure, a prescription for docility. Imagine being confined to bed for weeks or even months, forbidden from reading, writing, or engaging in any intellectual activity, subjected to forced feeding, isolation, and constant surveillance, all to cure your supposed nervous exhaustion. This was the infamous rest cure, a widely prescribed medical treatment for women in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, most famously developed by American neurologist Dr. S. Weir Mitchell. While presented as a therapeutic intervention, the rest cure, especially when applied to women exhibiting signs of independence for an intellectual and powerful, psychologically oppressive cure for female autonomy, designed to enforce docility and domesticity. Dr. S. Weir Mitchell was a prominent and highly respected physician, known for his work in neurology, and as a prolific writer. His rest cure was typically prescribed for patients, predominantly women, diagnosed with neurasthenia, a vague term for nervous exhaustion, characterized by fatigue, anxiety, headaches, and depression, or hysteria. Mitchell believed that these conditions were caused by an overtaxed nervous system, often exacerbated by intellectual exertion, social ambitions, or simply too much activity for a woman's supposedly delicate constitution. The solution, in his view, was complete and utter rest. Typical rest cure regimen was severe and isolating. Patients were confined to bed, sometimes in a darkened room, for 6 to 8 weeks, or even longer. They were forbidden from standing, sitting, up, speaking, reading, writing, or even sewing. All intellectual and physical activity was strictly prohibited. Visitors were often restricted, and patients were attended to by a nurse who meticulously controlled every aspect of their day. They were put on a regimen of forced feeding, often consisting of large quantities of fatty foods like milk, cream, and meat, sometimes administered through a tube if the patient refused. Daily massages and electrotherapy, mild electrical currents applied to the body, were also common components, supposedly to stimulate muscles and nerves that were otherwise dormant. The underlying philosophy of the rest cure, particularly for women, was deeply rooted in the era's patriarchal views on gender and mental health. Mitchell and many of his contemporaries believed that women were inherently weaker and more emotional than men, prone to nervous breakdowns if they stepped outside their prescribed domestic sphere. Intellectual pursuits, professional ambitions, or any form of independent thought were seen as potentially dangerous, diverting energy from a woman's reproductive organs and causing her to become overstimulated and nervous. The rest cure, therefore, aimed to subdue a woman's mind, break her will, and re-establish her as a docile, physically dependent being, ready to return to her natural role within the home. The most famous patient of the rest cure was the American writer and feminist Charlotte Perkins Gilman. She was prescribed the rest cure by Dr. Mitchell himself in 1887 for severe depression and anxiety following the birth of her daughter. Gilman described her experience in harrowing detail, noting that the enforced idleness and mental stagnation pushed her to the brink of insanity. She was told to live as domestic a life as possible, have but 2 hours intellectual life a day, and never touch pen, brush, or pencil again. Gilman's chilling short story, The Yellow Quell, 1892, a semi-autobiographical account of a woman undergoing the rest cure, powerfully illustrates the psychological torture of being denied intellectual stimulation and autonomy, leading to a descent into madness as the narrator obsesses over the patterns in her room's wallpaper. The story is a stark testament to how enforced passivity can erode one's sense of self and reality. Consider a young woman, perhaps named Helen, in the 1890s, who felt suffocated by domestic expectations and yearned for a life as an artist or scholar. If she began to express dissatisfaction, show signs of fatigue, or become emotionally withdrawn, symptoms that today might be recognized as depression or anxiety, stemming from a lack of fulfillment, her family doctor might quickly diagnose her with neurasthenia. Instead of encouraging her passions or addressing the root causes of her unhappiness, the doctor, following Mitchell's recommendations, might prescribe the rest cure. Helen would be isolated from her support network, her books and art supplies confiscated, and her independent spirit systematically dismantled through enforced idleness and physical dependency. The goal was not truly to cure her mental distress by addressing its origins, but to cure her of her independence, her ambition, and her desire for a life beyond domesticity by rendering her physically and psychologically incapable of pursuing them. While some patients did report temporary relief from the rest cure's symptoms, likely due to the forced respite from their demanding lives, the long-term psychological damage for many was significant. It stripped women of their agency, silenced their voices, and often exacerbated their mental health struggles by denying them intellectual stimulation, social connection, and meaningful activity. The rest cure was a powerful tool in the medical arsenal of the era, reflecting a societal desire to control and contain women, particularly those who showed signs of intellectual, social, or emotional independence. It was a cure that reinforced the belief that a woman's true purpose lay in rest and domesticity, ensuring that any spark of autonomy was systematically extinguished, all under the guise of restoring her health